Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have a very important topic for you all, and that is talking about subdrop and topdrop, what they are, how it occurs, what they actually mean. Now, I do have a video that I've already made about aftercare, which you can see down below, but I'm going to be following up later this week with another video that is specifically going to be dealing with how to provide aftercare to tops and how to prevent top drop from happening. I'm going to be talking about it a little bit in this video, but for a more in-depth coverage of that topic, please click the link down below when it's available for you guys to watch. So subdrop is basically any sort of negative physical, mental, emotional reaction that happens after a scene has occurred. This could be immediately after a scene, it could be hours, it could be days, it could potentially be weeks after a scene has occurred. Now, physically what's happening during subdrop is basically when you are experiencing a scene, usually this is something like an impact scene, rope scene, needles, something like that, something that involves a lot of physical exertion, your body is going to be producing a lot of adrenaline, it's going to be producing a lot of hormones. So basically your body does this. It's building up all of these hormones, all this adrenaline, all this cool stuff, and then suddenly the scene ends and your body's like, what? And then suddenly you have that drop. You have the drop in your body producing all of those adrenaline, all of those hormones that are going on in your body suddenly get cut off, and that is what can cause subdrop, that sudden drop in hormones. That's where the name comes from. Makes sense, right? So basically, that's what happens physically. And you can prevent subdrop by providing aftercare. And basically what aftercare tries to do is it attempts to make that really sharp, steep curve that can happen after the end of a scene and smooth it out and make it a more gradual transition into your everyday normal physical functioning, and that's awesome. What you actually need to do for aftercare is going to depend on the scene, depend on the person, just really depend on what you actually like to experience. Again, I have videos links down below if you guys want to learn more about aftercare specifically, but that is basically what aftercare does for subdrop. Subdrop can occur regardless of how the scene actually went. I think there's sort of a connotation that subdrop usually happens when a scene goes wrong, and that can for sure happen. It's definitely more likely that you'll experience subdrop if a scene does not go well, and especially if you don't have good supportive aftercare afterwards. So keep that in mind. But it can happen regardless. It can be like the most awesome scene ever, and you can still experience subdrop. It has no bearing on how well the scene itself actually went, especially if you're doing scenes that are, again, very physical and very intense. If you're doing things that are like pet play, like DDLG, service submission, it's less likely you're going to experience subdrop because usually those sorts of activities don't cause like a very like large increase in hormones and adrenaline and all that stuff that contributes to subdrop, but it can still happen, especially on a mental and emotional level. Okay, we had to change locations a little bit. Once again, the sun is like popping out in front of a cloud and behind a cloud over and over again, and like the lighting is being really weird, so I'm sorry. Hopefully you guys can kind of see my face, but just listen to my voice if the screen bothers you and you can't handle the lighting. But as I was saying, what actually happens during subdrop will depend a lot on the individual person and their individual experience. It can be a very physical thing. You could be physically ill, you can feel nauseous, you might feel dizzy, unable to concentrate, you could oversleep, you could have trouble sleeping, you could be very irritable and angry. There can also be a lot of mental and emotional things that are going on. Like I said, you can feel upset, you can feel angry, you can cry very easily, you could have trouble socializing with other people, you could become very quiet or become very outspoken and loud and angry. And it can be kind of hard to work out if something is subdrop or not, especially if it's something that happens a few days after a scene. I would just sort of, as you're doing scenes, keep tabs on yourselves, see if there's any correlation between your emotions and what you're experiencing with scenes, with what aftercare you've been providing. Kind of be a little bit frustrating trying to check and double check back and forth to see what is causing what, if there's any correlation or not. But definitely try experimenting with your aftercare if you experience subdrop frequently. It is something that can be helped, and there are definitely ways even to provide aftercare to yourself, practicing self-care after scenes, doing things like taking a hot bath, relaxing, making sure you get plenty of sleep, plenty of water can also be very helpful as well. Now, on the flip side, there is actually a top component to subdrop, and it's called Topdrop. It is definitely something that's less common and less talked about, and I think it's because it has a little bit less to do with that hormone adrenaline curve that we mentioned. It has to do more with sort of the mental, emotional aspects of actually participating in the scene. Something that doesn't get talked about is it is actually very stressful for a top or for a dom to be the one to construct a scene. It's a lot of pressure to be the one in control, and that's why a lot of people are submissives, is that control really stressful, and it can be very hard to deal with, especially if you're dealing with scenes that maybe the very physical component of it can be a lot easier to deal with because it's kind of easier to separate yourself from it in a lot of cases. But when you're dealing with something that is very emotionally intense, very mentally intense, that sort of relies on you to play the bad guy as the top, when you're done with that scene, it can be very hard to process and make sure that, you're still a good person on the inside, that your partner doesn't think of you as a bad person in an everyday sense, that they still love you and care about you, aren't actually afraid of you. That can be really, really hard. And it's something that I think needs to be talked about more, needs to be discussed more, because so much of the focus is on making sure that the sub is provided with aftercare that we don't necessarily think about what the top needs. Now again, you're not really experiencing that hormonal curve that we talked about, but aftercare still can very much smooth out the transition from a scene state to an everyday normal state. The same thing applies to tops as it does to submissives. Now, the experience of top drop, at least as I know it, tends to be more instantaneous. It tends to be something that happens sort of immediately after a scene or within a few days of a scene rather than potentially, several days, a week, or weeks out like Subdrop can be. So it tends to be very immediate again because it does have to do with that mental, emotional connection to what actually happened during a scene. Maybe it doesn't even have to do with what actually happened in the scene itself. Of course, it is more likely that top drop will be experienced if a scene does go badly. It could just have to do with the stress of trying to maintain a scene to begin with. It could again be a very awesome scene. It could be the best scene ever in the whole world in the history of BDSM, and you could still experience top drop just from the sheer stress of being the top in that situation. So if your partner is experiencing top drop, some signs to look out for would be, again, being emotionally reclusive, being very angry, being very irritable, being easily upset, general feelings of insecurity, feelings of low self-worth, low self-esteem. They can be very internal, so it can be kind of hard as somebody on the outside to know what to look for. But after a scene, it's very important that you check in with your dom again, even if it is the best scene ever in the history of scenes in BDSM, just to make sure that they're doing okay. Like, wow, that scene was awesome, it was so great, you did an awesome job. How are you feeling about it? Like, that is such a good thing to do. I think it's a really good, healthy practice because even if 9 times out of 10 they're like, yeah, that was awesome, I feel great, we should totally do it again, there could be that one time when they say, you know what, I'm feeling kind of weird about that. Can we talk about that? Like, I want to make sure that, like, you don't think I'm like a bad person or like you hate me for what I did to you or anything like that, because there is a lot of shame. There's a lot of weird feelings around sadism and about being a sadistic top or about being a sadistic dom. Like, it's hard to deal with. And even though I'm a submissive and I'm not even really a masochist, let alone a sadist, like, I still know that it's really hard to deal with and it's very difficult to kind of work through all of that. But that is really everything there is today to say about Subdrop and Topdrop. If you guys have any questions about this, please leave it down below in the comment section. If you want to get to any of the links or videos that I mentioned, just look in the description box down below. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you like my content, you can also find my Patreon down below. Every dollar really, really, really does help, and until I see you next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.